18 classmates are inscribed. For the guests who may not know me, I'm Dan Cox, proud member, Best of the Line 69, and your Master of Ceremonies today. We're honored to be joined by several family members of the fallen, including Bill Pahisa's sisters, Bernadette, Chris, and Mary, Joe Silva's widow, Margie, and daughter, Molly, John Shine's widow, Gail Caprio, brother, Colonel Al Shine, West Point 63, and his wife, Sandra, and nieces, Colleen Shine and her partner, Steve Frederick, and Jody Eves and her husband, John. Pick King's widow, Catherine, and her brother, John Stoltenberg, Jim Smith's brother, John, and wife, Susan, Paula Sautel's relatives, Adam Steiger, Lieutenant General Jack Woodmansee, West Point 56, and Colonel Rob Woodmansee, West Point 84. Also joining us are Lieutenant General Dale Vesser, George Bass's battalion commander, Lieutenant General Dave Oley, West Point 68, Paul Sautel's and Jim Smith's Ranger Company commander, and Rangers Al Parada and wife Sabrina, and Charles Riley and wife Irene, and Mrs. Jane Griffin, widow of Lieutenant General Tom Griffin, West Point 56, Jim Smith's Cadet Company Tactical Officer. 35 years ago, our classmate Jeff Proch brought the concept of a ceremony in remembrance of our Vietnam fallen to Bob Seitz and Bob Kimmett, and this tradition was born. The first remembrance ceremony was conducted in 1989, the 20th year anniversary of our graduation from the Academy. It has been held every 5 years since then. We owe a great debt of gratitude to Bob Seitz, who led this effort for 30 years, only turning over their privilege to me in 2019 upon his move from the area. I would like to acknowledge and thank the team who assisted me again this year, including Bob Kimmett, Jeff Proch, Pete Heesh, Bill Foster, Jim Foss, and Casey Brown, all of whom were instrumental in bringing this ceremony to life. I'm particularly grateful to Bob and Holly Kimmett for hosting our follow-on reception, as they have so graciously done many times in the past. Others contributing to this ceremony and deserving of thanks include the West Point Alumni Glee Club, directed by Nancy Riley, and represented today by members of 9 classes spanning the years 1957 to 1985, including 3 from Best of the Line 69. The members of Boy Scout Troop 350, led by Scoutmaster Tony Baker, and Girl Scout Troop 350, led by Scoutmaster Jody Baker. The committee chair of both troops, David Hellinga, and their sponsor, Farrellington United Methodist Church. As in 2019, the Scouts are giving us their Saturday morning for this service project, assisting our vendor in setting up and removing the chairs for the ceremony. National Park Service Ranger Martin Torres, a Navy veteran who stood in 3 inches of snow on this very spot with Jim Foss and me in January to discuss and approve this ceremony. And Sergeant Major Matt Byrne, the senior trumpet player of the U.S. Army Band, Persian's Own, for his service, and also for giving us his Saturday morning to perform taps during the ceremony. I will remind you that for several years now, veterans have been authorized to render the hand salute during the playing of all honors, should you so desire. Of course, placing a hand over the heart is certainly the acceptable alternative and is appropriate for all non-veterans. We are recognizing additional classmates at this year's ceremony. Every 5 years since the 20th anniversary of our graduation, this memory has commemorated the deaths in Vietnam of our 18 classmates whose names are inscribed on the wall. In 2001, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation created a virtual in-memory honor roll to recognize deceased veterans for their Vietnam service. Hank Schroeder was inducted onto that honor roll in 2001, and recognized in both the Foundation's first annual ceremony and our own class ceremony at the Wall in June 2003 and 2004 respectively. This year, at the request of their widows, the Foundation added Jerry Hackett, Dick Fowler, and Al Leister to the In Memory Honor Roll for induction year 2025. Their names will also be read at the Foundation ceremony here next June. Joining us today is Dick's widow, Karen. Earlier this year, we celebrated the 55th anniversary of our graduation from West Point with the most memorable reunion organized by Denny Helsel and his team. At that reunion, as customary, we held a memorial service for the classmates who had departed us since our cadet days. Today, that number stands at 156. It is a sad fact of life that that number will continue to increase until it ultimately numbers all 800 of our graduating class. But the number of classmates inscribed on that wall will always be 18. They are a special category. While many of us marched to the sounds of the guns in Vietnam, they are the ones who lost their lives on that march. They are the ones who, in the words of President Lincoln, gave the last full measure of devotion. But why the addition of this ceremony for those we lost in Vietnam? Those fallen are among the larger group we memorialize at each reunion. Perhaps it is because at the reunion, we recognize those losses as part of the natural progression of life to death, which we all face. While history teaches us that war is inherent to the human condition, none of us really consider death in war to be natural. Most of those classmates whom we commemorate at our reunions outlived those whom we memorialize today. They married, fathered children, in many cases welcomed grandchildren into the world. They had careers. They had more time to live and experience the joys of life. That was not so much the case for our Vietnam fallen. They all died young, in their early 20s. A little more than half were bachelors. The others left young widows. A few fathered and left an infant. All of them left this life much too soon. They left all of us much too soon. However, we recognize more than that in this ceremony. The phrase band of brothers has become somewhat ubiquitous these days. It is often bandied about in the media, mostly by those who really don't understand and have never experienced it. But we have. Shakespeare may have had Henry V speak it in his play. George Washington may have written it in his last general order to the Continental Army. And Stephen Ambrose may have popularized it in the title of his book about the members of Easy Company 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment during World War II. However, we actually lived it. We lived it for 4 years and more with those classmates whose names are now inscribed on that wall. We lived with them through the mental and physical challenges of West Point, of officer basic courses, airborne school, jungle warfare and ranger training, short assignments to the States and Germany, and finally in Vietnam. We knew them, in some cases, better than we knew our own siblings, and we loved them as much. However, I believe there's more significance for us in this ceremony beyond the poignancy of their early deaths and beyond the personal grief we may feel at the loss of our classmate brothers. The significance is that they died in combat in their early 20s, and we survived it and have lived into our late 70s. Why? Why them and not us? As soldiers, we know that there's no discernible reasons for their deaths and our survival. Survival in war is often described as a matter of inches and is recognized as due to sheer luck of the non-believers or divine providence by those of faith. Among you today is a classmate who's led his platoon to rescue a Ranger detachment in contact and was seriously wounded doing so, while the Ranger leader at his side was killed. There is a classmate who was standing with two of his soldiers when a mortar shell exploded among them, killing one and wounding him and the other. There's a classmate who found himself in a minefield where a soldier following immediately behind in his footsteps was killed by a mine. And there is a soldier, the classmate rather, whose M16 muzzle deflected a bullet fired at him from just feet away. But for a matter of inches, in the grace of God, and the names of each of those classmates would be inscribed on that wall. Many, if not most of you, can relate to that from your own combat experiences. Experiences you may have shared with others, perhaps only with a spouse, or perhaps not at all. I would not be surprised if there are at least 50 similar stories among the classmates at this very ceremony, and several hundred among the approximately 2/3 of the 800 graduates of our class who served in Vietnam. But for a matter of inches and the grace of God, and many more than 18 classmates would be inscribed on that wall. Duty, honor, country. In the words of General MacArthur, those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. Those 18 are different, not in their adherence to the tenets of duty, honor, country. All of us, I'm sure, have attempted to do the same throughout our lives. They are different because of the consequences they suffered in doing so. But for the grace of God, any one of us who made that march to the sound of the guns in Vietnam could have ended up inscribed on that wall. But God, in His almighty wisdom, chose them, not us. We will never forget our classmate brothers. We are joined together today as we have faithfully done 6 previous times over the last 35 years to remember and honor them for their sacrifice, a sacrifice for us and for our country. At this point, I would ask you to rise as the Glee Club performs the national anthem and remain standing for the invocation. You are welcome to sing along if you so desire. The invocation and benediction today will be offered by our own class son, Father Mark Ivany. Father Ivany, the son of Bob and Marianne Ivany, is currently the director of seminarians and of priest vocations for the Archdiocese of Washington. Father Mark.
Dear friends, let us pause for a moment of silence as we invoke the Lord's blessing by praying together the Cadets' Prayer. God our Father, thou searcher of human hearts, help us to draw near to thee in sincerity and truth. May our religion be filled with gladness, and may our worship of thee be natural. Strengthen and increase our admiration for honest dealing and clean thinking, and suffer not our hardened of hypocrisy and pretense ever to diminish. Encourage us in our endeavors to live above the common level of life. Make us to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be content with a half-truth when the whole truth can be won. Endow us with courage that is born of loyalty to all that is noble and worthy, that scorns the compromise with vice and injustice, and knows no fear when truth or right are in jeopardy. Guard us against flippancy and irreverence in the sacred things of life. Grant us new ties of friendship and new opportunities of service. Kindle our hearts in fellowship with those of a cheerful countenance, and soften our hearts with sympathy for those who sorrow and suffer. Help us to maintain the honor of the core untarnished and unsullied, to show forth in our lives the ideals of West Point, in doing our duty to thee and to our country. All of which we ask in the name of the great friend and master of all. Amen.
Please be seated. It is my great honor to introduce our guest speaker, Ms. Colleen Shine. Colleen is John Shine's niece and brings a unique perspective to our ceremony as a family member of one of our fallen. Colleen is a founding member and advisor to the Board of Sons and Daughters in Touch, the nation's first military service organization serving Gold Star children. The Shine family not only lost John, killed in action on October 15, 1970, but also Colleen's father, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shine, an Air Force fighter pilot missing in action on December 2, 1972, over the borders of North Vietnam and Laos, whose remains were only repatriated for burial in 1996. Colleen has been a spokesperson for the PLW MIA accounting mission for more than 4 decades, and is a frequent speaker and writer on Gold Star and military survivor issues. She has recently served as a mentor on the Department of the Air Force Survivor Advocacy Council, and is also the Shine family liaison for the Air Force Top Gun Award in her father's name, now in its 43rd year. The Anthony C. Shine Award highlights the PLW MIA mission issue and recognizes pilots of exceptional character and professionalism in flying a tactical fighter aircraft. Just last month, the American Battle Monuments Commission and the Defense PLW MIA Accounting Agency co-hosted a ceremony on the Courts of the Missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. Colleen was instrumental in organizing and was a featured speaker at that ceremony, where classmate Robin Kababa placed a rosette next to Ken Yonen's name, indicating that his remains have been identified and repatriated to the United States. Please join me in a warm welcome for class niece, Colleen Shine.
Good morning. I like that name, class niece. Thank you. I'm truly honored to be here with the class of Best of the Line 69 and your families and your Gold Star families. Here on the National Mall, we're standing in the paradox of larger-than-life memorials to the giants who shaped our democracy, and by this hallowed memorial to the giants who gave their all defending those ideals. The wall and the 3 Fighting Men statue, now in its 40th year, reflect the strength, courage, and selfless service of our Vietnam veterans, as do you who have returned to live intentional lives worthy of their sacrifice. Your class has an intimate relationship with the wall, not only to the names it bears, but to its very foundation. Bob Kimmett worked alongside founder Jan Scruggs, who I think is here with us today, and they helped shepherd the wall, both from its concept to its dedication. Doing something like that here in Washington, D.C. is no easy feat with the incredible bureaucratic obstacles. Mike Nardati, 12 years of leadership on the board of directors of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, helped care for the memorial and shape its powerful programs that educate and heal. For many years, I carried in my purse an excerpt from Emerson's essay on compensation. There he notes that the compensations of calamity are made apparent after long intervals of time, and that the once privation of the death of a dear friend or family member can later assume the aspect of a guide. It operates revolutions in our way of life, he explains, such that the man or woman who would have remained a sunny garden flower, by the falling of the walls and the neglect of the gardener, is made the banyan of the forest, yielding shade and giving fruit to wide neighborhoods of men. Alexander the Great and his army first encountered banyan trees when they reached India in 326 BC. The 17th century English poet John Milton speculated in Paradise Lost that Adam and Eve were first clothed in banyan fig leaves. After last year's wildfires in Lahaina, there was a fanfare over a scarred but thriving 150-year-old banyan tree as a symbol of resilience. And so as I drove up to the Punch Bowl Cemetery in Honolulu a few weeks ago for that ceremony Dan spoke of, where we updated the names of 955 Vietnam veterans who had been missing, to accounted for, one of them your classmate Ken Yonan, I was struck by the sight and symbolism of an alley of banyan trees standing strong and offering shade. While I cannot fathom the hazards of military service you have endured, I can say definitively that the military family often sacrifices too. We and you who have survived to bear witness are the banyans of the forest standing in the gap and carrying on the legacy of those we lost. There are 58,281 names on the wall. 1,574 are still unaccounted for with a cross beside their name. More than 115,000 parents lost their sons in Vietnam, and an estimated 20,000 children lost their fathers. Not just the tragic statistics of an unfinished war, but men who are missed and loved and remembered. It's been said there were 1 million Vietnam Wars. Each veteran and family member experienced his or her own, each story a parable. Like most military brats of that era, I'm speaking to you, Joanna, my brothers and I didn't get a vote on whether our dad would serve in Vietnam. He was a career Air Force officer who hailed from a proud, patriotic family. His father had served on General Bradley's staff in World War II and in the Air Force Reserves during Korea. All 4 children went to Vietnam, 1 by air, 2 by Army, and my aunt serving as a Red Cross worker before returning home to become a career Army nurse. While I can say a lot of great things about my dad, he somehow failed to steer his 3 younger siblings into aiming high, and they all wound up in the Army. In 1969, I was 5 and in kindergarten in Kadena, Okinawa, when I first witnessed the costs of war. My Uncle Al, class of 63, and here with us this morning, first an ARVN advisor, then a rifle company commander with the 1st Cav, was severely wounded on his 2nd tour. He had a layover in Okinawa on his way home, and I remember seeing his chest, a mix of shrapnel and stitches so dense it looked like a zipper. He said it was, so they could just unzip him to do more surgeries. And in my child's understanding, I believed him. When I was 7, I learned more about the toll of war when a family friend's father, he was a fellow F-105 pilot friend of my dad's, was shot down and held captive in the Hanoi Hilton. I donned a POW-MIA bracelet in solidarity with his family. Later that year, war hit closer to home when my Uncle John was killed in action in October of 1970. His wife, Gail, here today, was at Guy Hester's funeral, helping Elsie when she learned of John's death. My father escorted his brother's body home for burial at West Point, then returned to his job flying fighters. In Vietnam, he was one of thousands of American airmen who flew and fought day and night in one of the most heavily defended airspaces the world had ever known. After flying more than 100 combat missions in what he referred to us kids as bad guy land, he had etched enough hash marks on his 100 missions hat to come home. Our family PCS to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and when his squadron was called up, he volunteered to go again, writing in a note to his parents that if we pull out now, you can color the whole region red. On December 2, 1972, just weeks before the Paris Peace Accords were signed and weeks before Christmas, my father's A-7D Corsair disappeared beneath the cloud covering on the border of North Vietnam and Laos during an armed reconnaissance mission. His wingman lost touch, search and rescue efforts proved futile, and he was listed as missing in action. I was just 8 years old when I donned my second POW bracelet, this time for my dad. My father was a strong man physically and morally. He was a man of integrity who strove for excellence, whether on the football field in college or in becoming one of the best fighter pilots in the Air Force. At home and at war, he led by example. He was a teacher and a mentor and a hands-on dad, teaching us how to whittle and fish, do pull-ups, snorkel, and raise and lower the flag. Our family was shattered by his loss and by the uncertainty of not knowing his fate. My mother battled our government and the governments of Indochina for answers. Over the next 24 years, our family faced a burden of uncertainty. My mom not knowing if she was a wife or a widow, and us kids not knowing if Dad would ever come home. As much as she tried to protect us, there was trauma and tearful nights. There were no support networks or peer mentorship, and a lot of growing up early. While I understood death, missing was different, and I often pretended my dolls were parachuting into the jungles of Vietnam too, finding berries and maybe a squirrel to eat. In the absence of answers, we had to make up our own story. Having hope that he was alive, our family wrote letters and sent care packages according to the specifications allowed by the Vietnamese prison system. My older brother chose a whistle, compass, mirror gadget to try to help my dad escape, and naive and young, I chose freeze-dried steak because Dad loved steak. I jumped into advocacy in elementary school, passing out POW-MIA bumper stickers on the playground. And the first time I saw the White House, I was 13 and carrying a President Carter Where's My Daddy sign. I wrote POW-MIA articles in my high school newspaper, and my first job out of college was as the PR director for the family member organization, working for an honorable accounting. Like my grandfather and my mother before me, I leaned into POW-MIA advocacy efforts, giving countless speeches and press interviews, starting with my home newspaper, then expanding to the New York Times, Boston Globe, Oprah, BBC, Good Morning America, Nightline, you name it. After 14 years of hearing nothing, in 1986, a cottage industry of remains and information had arisen, and our family started receiving dog tag type reports on my dad, and even a live sighting report. Our hopes were raised and dashed repeatedly, but over those painstaking years of back and forth with our government, it became apparent that one day we might have answers and someone might know his fate. In the mid-1990s, after following up on the various leads, our government determined that there was nothing more to learn on my father's case and placed it in a pending category, saying any wreckage would have likely been scavenged by villagers and any human remains would have been eaten by animals or acidic soil. I traveled to Vietnam hoping to make peace with the plight of uncertainty. Meeting with an elderly villager who claimed to have witnessed a crash site, we climbed up through a triple canopy jungle to a tentative crash site in a craggy ravine. Instead of a barren mountain, I found pieces of aircraft wreckage on the surface and a turbine engine with a serial number on it. As I left, the villager gave me a helmet our government said was his memento of the war, to borrow for testing that might link it to my dad's case or that of another missing pilot. As we spoke through an interpreter, I turned the helmet in my hands only to see my father's name handwritten inside it. Upon return, I testified before Congress and met with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs trying to improve the process. The Secret Service lab ink dating and a handwriting analysis checked out. It was my dad's name, written by him in Air Force issue indelible ink from the late 1960s. The helmet's thermal loading and dynamic pressure indicated the pilot wearing it could have survived. Our government went back in and did a full-scale excavation of the site, recovering fragmentary bone particles and that we could do a mitochondrial DNA match on. In 1996, just across that bridge, through the grace of God and the efforts of many, we were able to honor my father's sacrifice with a military funeral at Arlington. Finally, our family had the peace of mind and heart that comes with knowing the fate of a missing loved one. Just this week, a Marine Corps captain missing for 51 years was laid to rest at Arlington. It was a bittersweet but welcome homecoming, and his family is so grateful to have that truth to face and move forward from. The resolution of my dad's case and Captain Forrester's case is proof that answers are possible and important. Today, the POWMIA flag flies as a reminder that America stands by those who serve, and that those who don the military uniform today will never be left behind or kept behind following the war. I wanted to share a few silver linings. Captain James Seahorn, who's now General James Seahorn, whose POW bracelet I wore as a child, came home in Operation Homecoming. And as Dan said, as the little girl who had the war done unto her as a child with no say, I was able to help establish Sons and Daughters in Touch, our nation's first Gold Star children organization. I have served on the boards of multiple Vietnam War-related national nonprofits and met with leaders here in Indochina to improve policy and operations on the POWMIA issue. Just as most of you have worked to improve your corners of government, business, and community, and to leave a legacy for today's warriors, I have worked to make the path less rocky for tomorrow's Gold Star families. War reverberates for generations, and healing is a lifetime affair. There are triggers of birthdays and anniversaries, and even decades later, seeing a war movie, reading a looming headline, discovering letters he wrote, hearing stories, visiting Vietnam, or maybe even meeting an opposing general. War. Fortunately, these are also connections to those we didn't get enough time with. Death ends a life, but not a relationship. We're stronger because we knew them and because we know each other. They say that sometimes it's easier to die for an ideal than to live for it day in and day out. You have, particularly this class, have lived extraordinary and intentional lives of service, choosing that hard right over the easy wrong over and over again. I know the Gold Star families of the class of '69 join me in commending your faithfulness and your generosity in endowing so many memorial scholarships in your fallen classmates' names at the Army Scholarship Foundation. You have breathed new life into their legacy, and we are deeply grateful. You are the Banyans standing in the gap. We're so glad you're home. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen, for honoring us and our fallen classmates with your remarks, and for your service to our veterans, and especially to the Gold Star community. The Glee Club will now perform Mansions of the Lord, after which we will conduct a roll call of our fallen classmates. Please rise for the roll call of our classmates and remain standing for the conclusion of our remembrance ceremony with the playing of taps, the benediction by Father Ivany, and the singing of the West Point alma mater. The roll call of our classmates who died in Vietnam and whose names are inscribed on the wall of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. First Lieutenant William A. Pahisa. First Lieutenant Joseph A. Silva. First Lieutenant Guy W. Hester, Jr. First Lieutenant Jonathan C. Shine. First Lieutenant Terrence P. O'Boyle. First Lieutenant Arthur S. Navin. First Lieutenant P.B. King. First Lieutenant James L. Smith. First Lieutenant George C. Bass. First Lieutenant Thomas A. Delco. First Lieutenant Carl B. McGee. First Lieutenant Paul C. Sawtell. First Lieutenant John J. Woodrum. Captain Glenn S. Ivy. Captain Harry L. Fame. Captain Edwin G. Northup. Captain Frank G. Oliver. Major Kenneth J. Yonan. The roll call of our deceased classmates who are recognized for their Vietnam service on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation's In Memory Honor Roll. Lieutenant Colonel Henry J. Schroeder III. Captain Jerome R. Hackett. Captain Richard T. Fowler. Colonel Albert F. Leister, Jr. I ask you to please render appropriate honors at the playing of taps. Sergeant Major Burns. Please join the Glee Club. Father Ivany will now offer the benediction.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for the lives of those who we have remembered. We ask you to instill in our minds and our hearts your divine presence, that we may hold hollow the memory of these, your sons and our brothers. We thank you for the gift that they have been and the gift that they continue to be. May their sacrifice and imitation of your Son never be lost and may always be held close to our hearts. We ask you, Lord, to send your blessing upon us this day, that we may be good stewards of the many gifts that we have received, the gratitude for the gift of our lives and those that make life in this country possible be safeguarded and matured and passed on. We ask this with grateful hearts this day in your name. Amen.
Now please join the Glee Club in the singing of the Alma Mater. wreath will now be carried to the apex of the memorial and laid there by our class officer, Bob St. Onge, representing the West Point class of 1969, and Colleen Shine, representing the family members of our fallen. Please allow the other family members to follow a short distance behind, as National Park Service regulations permit a maximum of 5 to accompany the wreath. The rest of the audience is welcome to then follow or observe from this location before proceeding to pay your respects at the memorial. A thank you to Bill Taylor, class of 70, and Bill Barr, class of 69, for recording our ceremony today. Thank you for attending. We look forward to socializing at Bob and Holly's home at 2419 North Fillmore Street in Arlington from 11:30 to 13:30. Parking is available in the large lot across from their home or on Fillmore and 24th Streets. Bob, Colleen.